Hello, I'm Ben. Welcome to the channel. So today we're going to talk about two different things, but they're all coming from the same situation or the same part of the Bible. So what we're going to talk about first is the Ten Commandments, and second, the Sabbath day. So I guess we'll start with the Sabbath a little bit to talk about the basics of understanding so you can see what we're saying once we're reading through the Ten Commandments. And I would say this to you, the best way to read the Ten Commandments and understand the questions about the Sabbath is to read the Bible, okay? To get the words from the Bible, not from some priest or some preacher or somebody that's got other motivations other than what God said. So we'll jump right in with that and get rolling. So the Ten Commandments are found in the Bible. Of course, I'm reading from King James. This is Exodus chapter 20, and the Ten Commandments start right at verse 3. So let's get into it, and we'll read them directly from the Bible, how they're written in the Bible. And then we will take a look at how they've been shortened so people can start to generate confusion. And then we'll talk about where the changes were made and when. Okay, so this is chapter 20. This is Exodus chapter 20. And I'll go ahead and start at verse 1. It says, And God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in the heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or is in the water underneath the earth. So no totems, no idols of any kind. Don't worship anything that is made by God. Worship God directly. That's what it says. Take no graven image. Verse 5 is, Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. So what he's saying there is that people that hate him, their families will pay down to the fourth generation. So what you do has a generational impact on your family and those that come after you in your lineage. That's verse 5. Verse 6 says, And showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. 7 is, Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord, verse 7 rather, Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. Verse 8 says, Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Verse 9 says, 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath day of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. Verse 11 says, For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it, which means he made the Sabbath day holy. And the seventh day, the last day of the week, is Saturday. Sunday is the first day of the week. Okay, so the Sabbath, based on this, which was written by the hand of God and given to Moses and the people of Israel, was saying that the seventh day is the Sabbath day that has been hallowed. Okay, verse 12 says, Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Verse 13 says, Thou shalt not kill. Verse 14 says, Thou shalt not commit adultery. Verse 15 says, Thou shalt not steal. Verse 16 says, Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Verse 17 says, Thou shalt not cover thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not cover that neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything other than that is thy neighbor's. Okay, verse 18 says, All the people saw the thunderings and the lightnings and the noise from the trumpet and the mountain smoking. When the people saw it, they removed and stood afar off. And it goes how Moses came down the mountain and found them worshiping idols and ended up throwing the first draft of the Ten Commandments into the idol, destroying them, and had to go back up and get God to write them down for him again. So, the importance of the Ten Commandments. The first 4 were specifically between man and God. The last 6, which were on the second tablet. So the first 4 were on the first tablet. That was what was supposed to be done through how man was supposed to focus and treat and respond to God. And the 6 that were on the second tablet were between man and man. And the way they were written is important because you get the full amount or the full accord of what the commandment is saying. So when you see the commandments on list, it comes out of the list. It's read just like this. It says, Thou shalt have no other gods before me. The verse had much more in it than that. Number 2 is you should make no idols. The verse was much more specific than that. Number 3 is you should not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Number 4 is keep the Sabbath day holy. It said a lot more about the Sabbath than that. But see, that's how confusion comes in, guys. People shorten everything. We're in a world where we think we're moving so fast that we cut things down. And when you do, you're taking out a lot of the definition, which would wipe off any confusion that you might have about the situation. Okay? Honor your father and mother is the 5th. You shall not murder is the 6th. 7 says you should not commit adultery. Well, the actual law says thou shalt covet. So you should not commit adultery. You should not steal is 8. You should not bear false witness against your neighbor is 9. You should not covet is 10. So it cut that big verse down to you shall not covet. So you'll see that the secular look at what is in the Bible is not good, because the first thing they do is shorten it. And when you shorten things, you lose a lot of the definition, a lot of volume behind it. So that's that. And here it says specifically in the commandments how specifically important the Sabbath is, how important it is to God, and is the 6th day of the week. And so what a lot of folks say is there's Jewish law, and when Christ came, the Jewish law changed. When Christ came and he died on the cross, everything that was the Old Testament had changed to the New. Now, a lot of that is correct, but this is God's moral law. So this stood and should stand forever. What changed was the requirement for sacrifice and all those things. We've talked about that in previous videos. Jesus was the last sacrifice of Passover, so you don't have to do any of that anymore. So in the Old Testament times, and Jesus actually talked about this when he was talking to the Pharisees, who were the priests, about the Sabbath. They asked him one time, they said, well, your disciples are picking grain as they're walking through fields. They would pick some grain on the Sabbath day as they were going from town to town. And they called Jesus out on that and called the disciples out on that. And Jesus gave them back two discussions. He said, well, one time David, talking about King David, and his folks actually ate the bread that was at the altar, which is a no-no, and nobody said anything to David about it. And then also he said, you, the priests, when everybody else is resting and worshiping on Sunday, you are working. So you're basically breaking the Sabbath because you're overseeing the offerings, you're overseeing all those things too. So this was him going back and forth. And he said, I'm the Son of Man is the king of the Sabbath, which is correct. And so what a lot of churches and a lot of places have taken to thought is that basically Jesus is the Sabbath, he is the written Bible, he is the Word, right? That's who Jesus is. So technically he is the Sabbath, which means if you believe in Jesus, it doesn't matter which day of the week you pray. That's not written anywhere in the Bible. That's a very big leap. It's a very big jump. Jesus is the king of the Sabbath. And the reason he said that to the Pharisees, to Jewish priests, because they were trying to lord the Sabbath over people. So when Jesus healed and did healing on the Sabbath day, they were saying he was in violation of the Sabbath law because of doing this. And at that point is when he said, look, the Sabbath is supposed to be a day of joy, a day that's looked forward to for everyone to rest and to worship together. And the way the Jewish church was lording over it, they were making it where it was almost too dutiful to even be what it was supposed to be, which was a day of rest. So that's what Jesus said. He didn't say change the day to Sunday and, do these type things. That's not what was said. So when you look through the Bible, Christ also sanctified the seventh day and hallowed it. He had blessed it and he said, I cannot reverse it. That's Numbers chapter 23, verse 20. But what I want to go through here shortly is, if you look online, you ask about the Sabbath questions, it says, does it matter which day, etc., etc. Here's the thing. The commandments are God's moral law, okay? And God was very specific about it. He said, you shall not add, this is in Deuteronomy 4, verse 2, he says, you shall not add to the word which I command you, nor take from it, and that you may keep my commandments, the Lord of your God, which I command you. That's Deuteronomy 4:2, saying keep the commandments. He's talking about the 10 commandments. God himself pledges not to alter his commandments. God himself pledges not to alter his commandments. He says, my covenant I will not break, nor alter the word that has gone out of my lips. That's Psalms 89, verse 34. So the Bible is clear. God didn't change the Sabbath to a different day of the week. God didn't change any of his moral law. That was set up as the law. And so then, of course, it goes through, did Jesus change the Sabbath day? And there's no proof in the Bible. There's no point anywhere in the Bible where Jesus changed the Sabbath. And anything, there's more examples on why it is Saturday and why it should be recognized as Saturday. So here's some verses to support that. Do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. This is Jesus. For assuredly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law till all is fulfilled. Whoever therefore breaks one of these commandments and teaches men so shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven, but whoever does and teaches them shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. So hopefully you heard that. That is Matthew chapter 5. That's verse 17 through 19. That's Jesus Christ speaking. Let me read that verse to you again. It says, do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For assuredly I say to you, till the heaven and the earth passes away, one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law till it is fulfilled. Whoever therefore breaks one of at least of these commandments and teaches men so basically you're teaching other people to, shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does and teaches them as they should, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 5, 17 through 19. So Jesus faithfully honored and observed the Sabbath. He's our example in Sabbath keeping. Jesus came to Nazareth where he had been brought up, and his custom was he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day. That's Luke chapter 4, verse 16. The Sabbath day is Saturday. So looking into the future, Jesus wanted his disciples to continue experiencing the joys of Sabbath keeping. He instructed them to pray that during the siege they would not have to flee from Jerusalem on the Sabbath. Pray that your fight may not be in the winter or on the Sabbath. That's Matthew 24, verse 20. And Jesus was speaking of the destruction of Jerusalem, an event that took place in AD 70, nearly 40 years after his resurrection. Jesus did not change the Sabbath commandment, nor did any other commandments. In fact, he instructed the rich young ruler to obey the 10 commandments. That's Matthew 19, verse 16 through 22. And it's clear from Jesus' teaching and example that we need the Sabbath for rest, relaxation, and spending time with God. So that tells you kind of the verses and how Jesus replied. But the best thing you can do is look in your Bible after the crucifixion. And there are 7 examples, or samples rather, where the apostles are talking about the Sabbath. So the greatest support to the Sabbath day is the crucifixion itself. So think, when Jesus crucified on a Friday, he rested in the tomb on Saturday, which was the Sabbath, and Sunday he arose. And the ladies that were attending to his body, the Marys, they had to leave the night that he was crucified because it had gotten late. And basically the Sabbath is viewed from the evening, the dusk basically, through the dusk of the following day. So the ladies had to leave Christ. They didn't finish prepping him for burial. They were going to come back to the tomb and do that on Sunday, the first day of the week after the Sabbath, to take care of his body and have him prep more properly for the grave. But they ran out of time on Good Friday. They ran out of time. So then Christ rests on the Sabbath, and he arose on the following Sunday. So during that period of time, in the Bible, there were 4 witnesses, right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And they wrote the verses in those same chapters by those names. And then there was also another verse in Acts that talked about the Sabbath and how Christ had his day. And the thing about the Sabbath being, and the reason I make this about the 10 Commandments and the Sabbath, there's some confusion in what laws were changed when Christ died. The religious law changed. Okay, and that means that people no longer had to sacrifice because he was the final sacrifice. That's why he released the animals the week prior to his sacrifice. The week prior to his death on the cross, he released those sacrificial animals that the Jews had that they were going to put aside to be sacrificed during Passover. So it just goes to show that those laws changed because he was the final sacrifice. And then also in the temple, the curtain dividing the holiest of holies, the back end of the temple where the priest went and prayed and had certain specific sacrifices, that was torn from the top to the bottom, right, from the roof to the ground, saying that it was no longer necessary. That to go to God now, you had to go through Jesus, and that was the way to God. So if you look in the chapters talking about the crucifixion of Christ, each one of them went through and discussed that example that I just gave about how the ladies had to leave and rested on the Sabbath day and were going back on Sunday to finish with Jesus before they found out that the tomb was empty and he had arose on that Sunday. So in that, the basically a reward or the missing text in the support for the Sabbath being Saturday, Matthew's one record in the Bible was this. He said, "In the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn towards the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene and other Mary to see the sepulchre." That's Matthew 28:1. So they came the first day of the week, which was Sunday. So that was written by Matthew's own hand in Matthew. That's the record there. Okay. Matthew wrote in his record several years after the resurrection of Christ. That's how he wrote it. So that means that the Sabbath did not change at the death and resurrection of Jesus, because he wrote that several years after that time had happened. And then Mark has two records that support the Sabbath is Saturday, and still should be Saturday. He said, "When the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Shalom, had brought sweet spices that they might come and anoint him. And very early in the morning on the first day of the week," because once then they didn't finish on Friday, they took the Sabbath off, and they came very early Sunday morning to try to finish the job. And they come on the sepulchre and rising of the sun. So that's Mark chapter 16, verse 1 and 2. So that's one of Mark's two records. Here's the second. "Now Jesus was in early in the first day of the week. He appeared first to Mary Magdalene. Out of the womb he cast 7 devils." That's verse 9 from Mark. And so here again, there's no word from Christ, only Mark's simple record of the resurrection saying the Sabbath was past before the first day came. So that's his two records. Then Luke has a record too, saying that the Sabbath is Saturday. He says, "Now upon the first day of the week, very early in the morning, they came to the sepulchre, bringing the spices which they had prepared, and certain others with them." That was Luke 24, verse 1. Luke likewise gives no other record that Jesus ever referred to moving the Sabbath, and that the Sabbath was still Saturday. And then John had two records as well. It was the same. He's talking about the same exact thing. First day of the week, Mary came Mary Magdalene early when it was yet dark unto the sepulchre. That's John chapter 20, verse 1. John gives the same story, the simple record of early morning experience. Then the same day at that evening, so this is the second verse that supports John saying that Sabbath is Saturday based on these actions. Then the same day of that evening, being the first day of the week, so it's Sunday that he's talking about, when the doors were shut, there were disciples were assembled for fear of the Jews. Then came Jesus and stood amidst them and saith unto them, "Peace unto you." That's John 20, verse 19. So that's talking about Sunday. It's not the Sabbath. It's the day after the Sabbath. So, and then when you go through this, so it seems beyond question. And guys, that's why I say read the Bible. It's without question here, if you're looking for the truth, that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the recorders of Jesus' life and the writers of the Bible, right, had nothing to say about Sunday sacredness. The Sabbath was Saturday. A whole lot of stuff was getting done on Sunday. Jesus' resurrection was on Sunday. Jesus himself rested on the Sabbath. Okay? And in Acts, there's one record saying, "Upon the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul preached unto them, ready to depart on the morrow, and continued his speech until midnight. And there were many lights in the upper chamber where they were gathered together." That's Acts 20, verse 7 and 8. So Luke wrote the book of Acts, and giving an inspired historical account of the early New Testament church, he recorded 84 Sabbath services after Jesus' ascension, and only one first day meeting as referred to in the text that I just read. So that should be plenty of proof from the Bible that says the Sabbath is still the holiest day, and it was set aside by God in the beginning. So what people might not know is marriage and the Sabbath came to us through the Garden of Eden. Those were edicts that were built in the very early days of man, in the first days of man, to be a promise and to be a relationship building thing between us and God. So the Sabbath and marriage were the two gifts given to us from the Garden of Eden before Adam and Eve were expelled. Okay, so that goes into the discussion around the disciples and the Sabbath. And there's nothing else in there in the Bible. It's not biblical the Sabbath should be on Sunday versus Saturday. When I looked into who changed it, some of the readings that I found, and these are secular readings, it was none of the disciples. And like we just read, there were no biblical evidence of Sunday worship at all. It was all seventh-day Sabbath, meaning Saturday. So the Sabbath is Saturday. It was Saturday. It's been Saturday since the beginning of time. God created it that way, and he rose it up. That was one of the first verses I read. He hallowed that day. The last day of the week is the Sabbath, and it should be observed as the Sabbath on Saturday. So when I read the evidence from history, the change to the Sabbath observance to Sunday, it's talking about when that happened. It happened after the New Testament, happened after the apostles had died. History records that Christians eventually shifted from worshiping and resting on the seventh day to the first day of the week. And so when you look for trying to find out, a history of the problem shows that in some places it was really only after some centuries that the Sabbath was really entirely abolished, and that the practice of observing the bodily rest on Sunday had taken place. So here's the point I want to make. I'm a biblical Christian. I believe the Bible is the Word of God. I believe the Ten Commandments were written by the hand of God. And in that, it says that the Sabbath should be remembered, you should keep that holy, and that is Saturday. I was raised in a Baptist church. Okay, we had church on Sunday. We also had church on Wednesday and any other day that the doors were open, right? We were in the church every day of the week. The argument has been made recently that Jesus is the Sabbath, and so as long as you have Jesus, you have the Sabbath. It's not wrong in saying that Jesus, he was the Lord of the Sabbath, as he was the Lord of everything else. The Bible is what Jesus was, and Jesus was the Bible, the living Word, walking around on the earth. So that's not incorrect, but at the end of the day, when you look at the Bible and you're reading it specifically what it says, it gives the direction. There's no confusion. And that's the point that I want to make. There's no confusion in the Bible. Okay? The confusion came after the Bible. So if you want to look into that for yourself, look at Exodus. That's where I've got those from. I named out all the verses that I gave you. Feel free to look into that. Here's the thing. Just because people do something a certain way doesn't mean it's right. Okay? And it doesn't matter if everybody's doing it. It still doesn't mean it's right. The Bible is what it is. It says what it says. It does what it does. And I believe that's the Word of God. So to me, the Sabbath is Saturday. That's something that I learned, in my later years. It's not something that I learned from church. Church didn't teach me that I was there on a Sunday. They didn't teach me that the Sabbath was that. And here's the point. The reason I study these things is I want to make sure that I'm doing all that I can to make God happy with what I'm doing here. For the remainder of my life. I'm a little older now. I just want to make sure I'm getting things right. And I'm reading those things for myself. I'm finding those things for myself. And I'm sharing that here on the channel with you. So I would invite you to look at those same things. Fortunately, there's not those churches that do practice the Sabbath like they're supposed to. They don't practice on Saturday. There's a 7-day Advent, which they believe that another book is wholly inspired outside the Bible, which is just false. So that's kind of cultish in my mind. So there's those type things that you have to consider when you're looking into this for yourself. So look into those things. Hopefully this was useful to you and hopefully it was helpful. I will do stuff around this in the future because it's pretty important to understand, what we're getting this from. I'll say this, that Constantine, when you think about the Sunday law, let me just be clear on who changed it. It was the Catholic Church that changed it. And if you've watched enough of my videos, you know how I feel about the Catholic Church. But on March 7th, AD 321, so in the year 321, Constantine the Great issued the first civil Sunday law compelling all people in the Roman Empire, except for farmers, to rest on Sunday. This was decreed with 5 other civil laws concerning Sunday and set the legal precedent for civil Sunday legislation from that time present. So understand who made the change. It wasn't biblical. It wasn't Jesus. It wasn't God. It wasn't the apostles. All this happened after the apostles died. AD 321 is when that happened by Constantine the Great. That's the earliest you can read where someone decreed in a law that Sunday should be the Sabbath instead of Saturday. So in the 4th century, the Council of Laodicea urged Christians to honor Sunday by abstaining from work on that day, if all possible, and prohibited them from abstaining from work on the Sabbath. So if you look at how the devil is going to manipulate man, first, it's confusion. But secondly, that's secular law going against the Bible, which is against what God said. And if you go back to the 10 Commandments in Exodus and you read what it says there, and you go back to that verse that I read earlier to you, what God said about the commandments, he doesn't mess around with the commandments, folks. He says very simple, do not think, this is Jesus, do not think that I came to destroy the law of the prophets. I did not come to destroy but fulfill. For assuredly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law until it's fulfilled. Whoever therefore breaks at least one of these commandments and teaches men so shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does teach them shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. So keep the commandments is what it's saying. Jesus faithfully honored and observed the Sabbath. He is our example of Sabbath keeping. He, Jesus, came to Nazareth where he had been brought up, and his custom was he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day. That was Luke 4, verse 16. So remember what the actual commandment says, and I'll read it right now one more time. It's Exodus 20, verse 8 through 11. It says, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath day of the Lord your God. You shall do no work. And it goes in to say, nor should your wife, nor shall your manservant, nor your maidservant, or your oxen, or any of those things. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. That's Exodus 20, verse 8 through 11. And then remember what I told you about Christ and the crucifixion specifically. He rested on the Sabbath day. He was crucified on Friday. He rested on Saturday and arose on Sunday, the day after Sabbath, the first day of the week. Hopefully this knocks some confusion off the subject for you. That's all I'm trying to do, guys, is I study these things on my own, and anything I find that like, this has not been honest from what we've gotten in our lifetime, and then to go back and find out it actually hasn't been honest since the day of Constantine the Great on March 7th, AD 321. So I'm Ben. If subject matter like this is intriguing to you, if you like these type of subjects and you're interested in these type of things, please subscribe, please share, please like the video, and I'll bring more of this content to you. I'm Ben. Be good.